the government being subject to suffrage creates the notion, aha, here's how we have to seize the state. And then that gets agreed upon, but there's a big split as to how to do it. One side says you go with the election. You mobilize the voter. That gets to be called reformism within Marxism. And the other side is revolution. Don't do that. This system, if I may quote Bernie again, is rigged. You can't get there. They've long ago learned how to manipulate parliaments. They buy the politicians and all that. And therefore, revolution is going to be the way to do it. Revolution gets a very big boost because the Russians, they did it that way. They didn't they fought in the Duma, in the parliament, but they didn't. And this focus on the state, I would argue, goes way beyond what the debaters at the time, and if you're interested in the great names, there was a great theorist of the role of the state in a reformist strategy to get power in Germany named Edward Bernstein. Very important. His opponents in Germany were Karl Kautsky and Rosa Luxemburg, the two other huge figures in Marxism at the time. And they wrote the articles that everybody reads, but it was a much broader debate. And by the way, that debate still goes on.
Reformism versus revolution?
Mm-hmm. And in terms not all that different. I mean, it's adjusted to history, but in terms that are different.
Can you comment on where you lean in terms of the mechanism of progress, reformation versus
I'd
revolution?
rather tell you the historical story.
Sure.
Over and over and over again, in most cases, the reformists have always won because revolution is frightening, is scary, is dangerous. And so most of the time, when you get to the point where it's even a relevant discussion, not an abstract thing for conferences, but a real strategic issue, the reformists have won. I mean, and I'll give you an example from the United States. In the Great Depression of the 1930s, you had an extraordinary shift to the left in the United States, the greatest shift to the left in the country's history, before or since. Nothing like it. Suddenly, you created a vast left wing composed of the labor movement, which went crazy in the 1930s. We organized more people into unions in the 1930s than at any time before or any time since. It is the explosion. And at the same time, the explosion of two socialist parties and the Communist Party that became very powerful, and they all worked together, creating a very powerful leftist presence in this country. They debated in a strategically real way, reform or revolution. The reformers were the union people, by and large, and the communists were the revolutionaries, by and large, because they were affiliated with the Communist International, with Russia and all of that. And in between, you might say, the two socialist parties, one that was Trotskyist in inspiration, and the other one more moderate Western European kind of socialism. And they had this intense debate. And they ended up, the reformists won that debate. There was no revolution in the 1930s here, but there was a reform that achieved unspeakably great successes, which is why it was as strong and remains as strong as it does, because it achieved in a few years in the 1930s, starting around 1932-3, Social Security in this country. We had never had that before. That's the same one we have now. Unemployment insurance never existed before, that you have till today. Minimum wage for the first time, still have that today. And a federal program of employment that hired 15 million people. I mean, these were unspeakable gifts, if you like, to the working class.
So that's the 30s and the 40s.
30s, not much in the 40s anymore, but in the 30s. And here's the best part. It was paid for by taxes on corporations and the rich. So when people today say, well, you can tax the corporate, the joke is I have to teach American history to Americans because it has been erased from consciousness.